from Yafa Eliach's Hasidic Tales of the Holocaust. It was a dark night, cold night, and the Yanavska road came. Suddenly a strong voice pierced through the darkness. Everybody must evacuate the barracks and report to the vacant lot. And anyone found in the barracks will be shot on the spot. Pandemonium broke out in the barracks. People began pushing their way to this door, calling out names of relatives and friends. And with every last ounce of energy, they began rushing out to the open field. And when they got there, they saw what they were rushing toward. 2 large pits dug into the ground. And suddenly another voice, a cold, healthy voice, called out, "If you want to save your miserable life and live, then you'll have to jump over one of the pits to the other side. And if not," the voice imitated the sound of a machine gun, and wild, coarse laughter followed by the SS and the Ukrainian guards. Even if they were healthy, it would be nearly impossible to jump over those pits. And now the Jews were skeletons, feverish with disease, exhausted from slave labor and starvation. And they realized that they would provide only entertainment for the SS and their collaborators. Amongst those thousands of Jews was the rabbi of Luzhov, Rabbi Israel Spira, who was walking with a younger man who was a free thinker who came from a large Polish city. And they both met at the camp, and a deep friendship developed between these 2 men. And the free thinker said, "Spira, we won't be able to jump over that pit. Why should we even try and play those devilish games with the SS? Let's just sit down in the pit and wait for the bullets to end our miserable existence." And Rabbi Spira looked at him and said, "My friend, man must obey the will of God. If it was decreed in heaven that pits be dug and Jews jump, so pits will be dug and jump we must. And if we fail and fall into the pit, we will reach the world of truth a second later after our attempt. Jump we must." And the 2 of them were getting closer to the edge of the pit, and they saw the pit was filling up with bodies. And as they stood by the edge of that pit, the rabbi closed his eyes and in a strong whisper said, "We are jumping." And when they opened their eyes, they found that they were on the other side of the pit. "Spira, Spira, we're here, we're alive. I don't know how it happened, but surely there must be a God. How did you do it?" And Rabbi Spira said, "My friend, I was holding on to my ancestral merit. I was holding on to the coattails of my father and my grandfather and my great-grandfather of blessed memory. But tell me, my friend, how did you get to the other side?" And he looked at the rabbi and said, And so for generations, we Jews have held on to each other as well as the past generations. And we have held on to each other as we crossed the forests, escaping fires, as we jumped pits, as we crossed the desert, as we journeyed through the sea of reeds. And how did we learn to have faith in God and hope and resiliency and the creative imagination that allowed us that resourcefulness? Through our Torah, through our oral traditions with the capital O and the small o, through all of the narratives, the folk tales, the parables, nostalgia, or to get stuck in the past, but memory to bring us to the present and to continue going towards the future so that we can choose life. One thing that I think characterizes Jewish life so well, and that's movement. We never just stay here in the present or in the past, but we have to know where we came from in order to know where we are going to choose life. And so if you look at Devarim 31, verse 13, we will see the teaching that Moshe passes on to the Israelites. Their children, too, who have not had the experience, shall hear and learn to revere the Lord your God as long as they live in the land that you are about to cross the Jordan to possess. So we have an obligation to tell the story to those who have not gone through the experience. And a more recent quote by a cognitive psychologist and visionary by the name of Roger Schenck in his book, Tell Me a Story, writes, "We need to tell someone else a story that describes our experiences because the process of creating the story also creates the memory structure that will contain the gist of the story for the rest of our lives. Talking is remembering." So Jews are a people who talk, right? And we are a people who remember. Talking is remembering. So I would like to suggest three things, three ideas. And it's, by the way, the poem and the videos that I saw just the other day at home and tonight again, I feel as if I was dialoguing with these teenagers, even though I've been working on this keynote for weeks. And it's beautiful. So I'd like to make these suggestions for expanding our listening to the stories of the survivors of the Shoah and the retelling of those stories, so that their stories continue from generation to generation, and those stories keep the people alive and the people that they remember, so that we can memorialize and learn from them, not only from their experiences in the Shoah, but I love that question. What did you do when you were a teenager? What was their life before? So I will get to that in a moment. But in order to tell you any ideas or suggestions, a storyteller has to tell a story. And this is a story that comes from Rabbi Benji Levine of Jerusalem. Some of you may know who he is, head of Yeshiva. And he wrote the story about his grandfather, Rabbi R.A. Levine, and contributed this story to a book that was published this past year in my honor, a book called Mitzvah Stories. I tell you this story with Rabbi Benji Levine's permission. And he wrote it, of course, in the first person. I'm going to tell it in the third person. In 1970, Benji Levine was a rabbinical student in Yerushalayim. His family had just moved back to Eretz Israel, and that Shabbat, he decided he would spend Shabbat with his parents. His father was a rabbi in Pardes Chana. And so he took the bus from Yerushalayim, and on the way, he was reading the newspaper, the Yediot, and he began reading an article all about his grandfather, Reb Aryeh Levin, who was known as the Tzaddik of Yerushalayim. And this beautiful man, Reb Aryeh, was beloved by everyone, especially the prisoners and the downtrodden and the meek. He had died only the year before, and he was already a legend in his own time. And this article talked all about how Reb Aryeh always fulfilled the mitzvah of escorting people who had visited with him from his home all out to the main street. Or if somebody was lost, he would accompany them to wherever they were searching to go. And Benji was reading about this and how his grandfather would quote from Maimonides as he would be escorting people. So that evening at Shabbat dinner, at the table, Benji asked his father, how is it that Reb Aryeh had this way of escorting people, that was his mitzvah? And Benji's father said, let me tell you a story. Before Eretz Israel was established as a state, Reb Aryeh would go to visit the prisoners who were arrested by the British, who had been fighting in the underground for the state. And so one Friday morning, Reb Aryeh was in a prison outside of Yerushalayim, visiting with prisoners, always trying to lift the spirits of the young men and young women, and sometimes these young men were Jizar. Take on a special mitzvah and perform it whenever possible, even when difficult. And for the teenagers, the younger people as well, especially, this special mitzvah of listening to stories of the survivors of the Shoah and retelling those stories of the survivors of the Shoah. And not only the stories themselves, but to ask the questions. What did you do when you were a teenager? That question really resonates with me. What wisdoms did you learn in your home that you would like to transmit to the next generation? What mitzvot did you see fulfilled by the people in your home, or that you performed? Whether as a younger person at home, or in the camps, or wherever you were. Or what mitzvot did you see others perform? So that we have a fuller story of what happened before the war, what was life like, and of the people they remember who perhaps did not survive. So it isn't just the experience that was so traumatic, but also what it is that they learned as they lived their life and needed to transmit to the next generations so that they can remain alive. This is the special mitzvah. Barbara Meyerhoff, who interviewed people in Venice, California, which is just down the street of me, right? In her incredible book, Number Our Days, tells a story about a woman in the concentration camps, and she sees one of her friends dangerously close to death, and she takes her own portion of soup and helps to feed her both portions of soup so that she was able to survive, to reach out. That's a mitzvah. Beyond. So that's the first part of this, the first suggestion, the first idea. To choose a special mitzvah and to do it whenever possible in its entirety. Second, well, and I know it will pierce yours too. And he began searching for somebody who had met Reb Peninnah Schram, who had learned at his yeshiva. And you know, if Rabbi Shlomo Carlebach would travel from one end of the world to the other with that guitar slung on his back, even in airports, start singing, telling stories, talking to people. But he never found anyone who had ever known or met Reb Peninnah Schram in Shapiro. One day, it was before Rosh Hashanah, Reb Shlomo Carlebach was in Tel Aviv, and he was down by the Yarkon, the beach, when he saw a street sweeper with a hunchback, scars, but a beautiful face. And Reb Shlomo greeted everyone he ever met, and he said, "Holy brother, Shalom Aleichem." And the street sweeper responded, "Aleichem Shalom." "You're from Poland?" "Yes." "From where?" "From Piaseczna." And Reb Shlomo's heart began to dance. "Maybe you knew Reb Peninnah Schram and Shapira?" "Knew him?" "Hell yes. I learned in his yeshiva until I was 11 years old." And Reb Shlomo said, "Holy brother, give me over one teaching of Reb Peninnah Schram, and I promise I will give it over to the rest of the world." And the street sweeper looked at Reb Shlomo and said, "Do you think I can remember anything? When I was 11, I looked like 17, and they sent me to Auschwitz, and they beat me. Look at my broken bones. Do you think I can remember anything?" "Yes, you must. One teaching. One teaching. And I promise I will give it over to the rest of the world." And when the street sweeper saw that Reb Shlomo meant what he said, he went over to the fountain, he put his broom aside, he washed, and he straightened himself as best he could, and he said to Reb Shlomo, "Shabbos with Reb Peninnah Schram was a Shabbos that won't come again until the Mashiach comes." Over that lesson of Reb Peninnah Schram and Shapira. Kinderlich. Tired Kinderlich, precious children, remember, die größte Sache der Welt ist zu tun Immerziehen, ertrinken. The greatest thing in the world is to do somebody a favor. And so, we need to have, beyond the kindness, we need to bring people into our lives so that we can listen to their stories. And when we listen to people's stories, as Barbara Meyerhoff discovered again in her book, Number Our Days, when we listen to somebody's story, we restore meaning to their lives. And so there's much kindness, many favors we can do in our communities. And third idea, and that is when we interview and talk with survivors of the Shoah, we of course want to know their names. In our tradition, we are each given 3 names. The name that's given to us, the name that others give us, and the name we give our family, but to do favors for others, and to learn about your own pasuk and the pasuk of the people, because then you learn their whole story and who they really are. So while stories teach us, it's the voice of the storyteller that creates the bond between the story and the listener. There's a book by Brana Gurevich, who is at the Museum of Jewish Heritage. It's a book entitled Mothers, Sisters, Resistors, Oral Histories of Women Who Survived the Holocaust. And there was one account that moved me very deeply because of the role of story within story. A woman by the name of Rose Muth, while in Auschwitz, tells of relating parables to her sister that their father had told to her. And these are the words that Rose Muth told that Brana Gurevich wrote. They, in one case, consist in a moral, in another in some practical advice, in a third in a proverb or maxim. To seek this counsel, one would first have to be able to tell the story. Counsel woven into the fabric of real life is wisdom. Listen to that. Counsel woven into the fabric of real life is wisdom. We never know when we're going to need the wisdom or advice or cautionary tales given to us in the most beautiful way through a story. Therefore, stories must fill the storehouse of memory from early childhood on through life to help us live and transmit our Jewish culture and faith and hope and resiliency and creative imagination. And you teenagers, you're some over here, back there, those of you who have teenagers, grandchildren who are teenagers, you have the extraordinary opportunity to take on this mantle of responsibility as a special mitzvah and transmit the stories of the people who experienced the Shoah. And by listening to